The blistering summer sun beamed down on the sizzling pavement, along with the soft pattering walk belonged to a physically exhausted 24-year-old woman. Her scalp was met with the scorching blaze as sweat dripped down from her forehead, nearly stinging and blinding her sight. Caryn Lila Trevors had quit her job from a local fast food taco restaurant she left from. She sniffled and wiped away the heavily pain-ridden tears from her face. Her legs were extremely sore from walking, so much so that she nearly became numb and almost fell over a couple times. As cars drove by, they never slowed down to show their concern. She didn't have a car at the time because she was flat broke and couldn't afford lessons at the DMV to get her license. Her tangled strawberry blonde locks, loosely held together by a cheap elastic hairband and a ponytail. Her work uniform did not help much either from the unbearable summer's heat, as it was all black. The black t-shirt and the black jean pants absolutely didn't pair well with the current temperature. Earlier, she was threatened by a rude customer, a middle-aged woman with a beehive-style hairdo, wearing an expensive fashion-branded shirt with golden hoop earrings. The selfish woman verbally harassed Caryn, all because the food she was offered was wrong, and one of Caryn's lazy coworkers handed her the wrong order, and she got the blame for it. Again. It wasn't the first time she got ridiculed. It happened to her constantly. So constant that she vividly remembered all the harsh complaints and emotional torture. She worked at the restaurant for only a year, and she thought she'd consider getting a promotion, starting her off her life with better financial stability. Yet, she was incorrect. Her boss belittled and downgraded poor Caryn whenever she made a small mistake or couldn't figure out a problem she had a difficult time solving. Her coworkers barely lifted a finger to help her out whenever it was a heavy-duty task or doing janitorial work. Caryn worked by herself to the bone. When the chores were meant for 4 to 6 people, she attended the register, cleaned the lobby, cleaned the bathroom, took out the trash, and broke down cardboard boxes, all at the same time. One day, she was written up because she had accidentally wore regular shoes at work instead of her non-slip black shoes she was forced to wear. Caryn often ran to the freezer and to the back to help her get away from severe panic attacks whenever lunch rush got too much for her. She screamed in bloody murder as the cold, freezing air nearly stiffened her throat. The freezer was soundproof, so no one can hear her yells of anguish through the metal walls. Right after that nasty customer told a lie to her manager, she was written up again and had to be placed on break. At that moment, Caryn internally sickened about the lie that one lady said, and she had no choice but to leave by walking out the lobby door, getting away from the prolonged abuse. Back to Caryn, she finally made it back home hours early than her normal arrival time back from work. She hesitantly opened the door at her apartment, slowly walking inside as she saw her father on the couch scrolling on his phone, looking at dating profiles. Not even an eye rose up to her as she silently walked on by. "You're home early," her father said in a tired yet stern tone. Caryn didn't even bother answering back at him while she walked inside her bedroom. Her small room didn't have much, just a small purple bed, a messy clothes drawer, an old TV laid out across the cold wooden floor with her insect collector's frames hanging on the wall across the room. She looked around the room, reminded herself that she definitely didn't want to move again. She got into her casual clothes and aggressively threw away the sweat-infested work uniform into the small trash bin next to her dresser. She wore a raggedy black shirt, opposite to what she was wearing before. The other black shirt had the restaurant's logo on the back, then wearing another clean pair of black jean pants, while the other pair left her legs in fabric burns by having to walk in her now former job. Caryn fell backwards onto her bed and stared up into her ceiling, her eyes heavy from the tears and lack of sleep due to the ridiculous working schedule. Her arms pulsed and ached from dealing with heavy objects, numbingly stiff as her arms laid across the bed as she laid there motionless. An hour passed when she woke up from her well-deserved nap and headed towards the bathroom. Moments later, she quietly yelped in agony as she pulled the hair tie from her scalp. Strands of hair had been ripped out. The stinging made her tear up even more. Her ghostly pale face reflected from the mirror, darkened bags around her once cheery complexion. Her hair had become more frizzled after the tie was removed. Combing the hair would make it worse since the hair tie had made countless small knots. The emerald brownish eyes, brightened by the redness of her tears, made them look almost bloodshot. Her lips almost didn't exist as she tried to stretch out a forced smile. Then Caryn drooped down her head while her shaky arms were handled into the sink and began to sob again and quietly because she didn't want her father to hear her and get pissed at her for it. She hated the fact that she couldn't express her bottled-up emotions from inside without being scolded by her verbally abusive parent. She immediately got back her composure and took a long shower to help forget about the stressful hellhole of a day. Thoughts rushed through her mind about how she ended up in a shitty neighborhood in the first place, as one of her arms twitched violently as she tried to shake off one of the bad memories she's trying to forget. Caryn wished she had a normal childhood like everyone else, but not for her since she wasn't the lucky one. Her parents split up when she was around 4 or 5 years old, and then she was diagnosed with high-functioning ASD at 6 years old when she failed to recognize certain emotions and facial expressions, along with small, intrusive twitches on her arm whenever she got too excited or very frustrated, which made life for her in school a living nightmare. Bullies mocked her and called her harmful names, one of which being called a retard, despite the fact Caryn was an above-average student. Her quick learning skills made her one of the high-ranking kids in education. The bullies grew jealous of her smarts, and they were constantly talked down to her about her special interests, such as insect sightseeing, being called Crazy Caryn because of it. To other kids, bugs were considered unsettling to them, but to her, she was infatuated with butterflies and moths. She has been to so many different schools because Caryn was forced to move by her so-called father whenever his relationships tended to fail significantly. Many friends she once had, now completely gone without keeping contact, moving to different places over and over and over again. The cycle seemed endless. The apartment she lived at was recent and the last place she would move to, and she hoped it stayed that way. She wasn't able to finish high school due to one of the moves, and it made her a great burden that she wasn't able to achieve her greater education and become an entomologist. Several days passed. Caryn's father got into another drunken verbal fight against her when one of his dates made an excuse to leave early due to the obvious reason of her father being an alcoholic. Caryn had no choice but to sneak out of the apartment once her father passed out drunk on the couch. His obnoxious snoring made Carol struggle to sleep, and she had had enough. She decided to stop at Marty's pub to grab something to eat since she hadn't eaten anything all day. The pain in her stomach grew when she could smell the freshly prepared wings fuming from the woods nearby. She grabbed her dark purple denim jacket and left. The woods was a 15-minute detour walk to the pub since her legs were too tired to walk longer distances. The cold summer's evening touched her face as she peacefully strolled through the forest, hearing the crunching of dead leaves underneath her. The echoing hoots from the owls surrounded the isolated wooden area, along with the barely audible sounds of crickets. When almost to her destination, something didn't quite feel right for her as one of her ears ringed, a low buzzing eerie sound. She turned her head over her shoulder, felt someone, or something, was behind her. Instead, she saw nothing. She shrugged and claimed herself that her mind was playing tricks, blaming the lack of sleep on the other night. Caryn stumbled upon the pub a few short steps later, and saw a familiar person cleaning the wooden countertops. An older gentleman, around his late 50s, had an old-fashioned curled mustache and graying brunette hair with a neat comb over, wore his usual outfit of a black top that paired well with his gray undershirt. Marty looked up and saw that one of his favorite customers was inching by. "Hey, kid, you look like you was starving. How about I whip you up the usual?" The friendly barkeep happily shouted as he made a beckoning hand gesture. "Hey, Marty, slow night, huh?" Caryn said tiredly, but brought up a warm smile. "Yeah, Wednesdays are usually slow, but at least not like Saturdays. Those college frat punks always make a mess of my property. I always love cleaning up after their mess," Marty said sarcastically along with a laugh. As he finished his sentence, he gave Caryn a fresh small basket of extra hot buffalo wings with blue cheese on the side and extra fries as a complimentary extra for Marty. Marty was filling up Caryn's usual beverage, root beer. He stated, "I'm still quite surprised you ain't afraid of walking those woods at night. Heard rumors people getting missing on the daily." "Missing?" Caryn replied. "Yeah, like some UFO or alien be snatching up those poor folks out of nowhere. Some paranoid nutcase came by one night claiming he saw some tall dude who was taller than a small building, saying he had no face. Jeez, what kind of drugs these kids getting into?" Marty said as he carefully placed her drink next to her food. "Trust me, I encountered them a lot," Caryn jokingly remarked, and Marty chuckled along with her. "Indeed. Sorry to hear about what happened. You've been through hell and back, kid," Marty said with a slightly saddened tone. Caryn shrugged a bit. "No worries, Marty. I'll find another job somehow." Her tone was almost depressed, since she knew it would be impossible. "That's the spirit, kid. When I was your age, I strived and fought my way through obstacles, and here I am, owning this beauty right here for 35 and counting." Marty pats her on the shoulder, congratulating her for her positive response. After finishing up her meal, she reached to her pocket to pay Marty, but he stopped her. "Hey, kid, you had a rough week. How about I cover you for tonight?" Marty insisted. Caryn was flattered. Caryn was flattered and enjoyed his free meal from Marty. Caryn was flattered and enjoyed her free meal from Marty. An hour passed. She said her farewells to Marty as she walked on back to the path back to the apartment. This time, the feeling became stronger, but she ignored it as she claimed herself that her head was playing tricks on her from her lack of sleep. She got back and silently opened the door. Her father still passed out on the couch. She slowly shook her head and walked past him. The look of anger and disappointment on her face as she cringed by his presence. The smell of hard liquor fumigated the living room. She went inside her room, messy, but clothes were well kept in a dresser drawer. Her purple bed lay aside the wall next to the small window where the pale moonlight gleamed through the gusty glass pane. Her purple bed lay aside the wall next to the small window where the pale moonlight gleamed through the dusty glass pane. On her bed was a pink stuffed bear her mother gave to her when she was 10 years old, the last time she ever saw her. Not only was her father a drunk and a hopeless romantic, he showed his abusive sides towards his mother in the past. He threatened to falsely press charges against her mother and label her as a bad parent on occasion, when in reality she was the sweetest person you would ever meet. She went away out of fear, which Caryn slowly learned over time about the truth, which sickened her even more. She got back into bed and looked at the window for a brief moment, before she slowly drifted off to sleep. The dream was what you might expect from her. She dreamt she was choking and strangling her father to death in the middle of the woods, while having a look of bliss and enjoyment on her face. Caryn always dreamt of it, almost every single night. But the dream was different. After she did the deed, a male figure watched her from the distance. She couldn't tell who or what that was standing there. It wasn't the tall figure like Marty had mentioned before. Instead, a brown hooded figure. He wore a pair of amber-colored goggles, mostly covering his eyes, as part of his forehead was shaggy brown hair. He was wearing a face guard, looked to be cloth, and looked to have a snowy pale face underneath. He watched on at her, then turned around and walked away, while twitching and slightly ticking. Caryn woke up abruptly in a cold sweat with the dream and gazed at the window across from her. The window was opened. Not too open for someone to creep into, but wide enough to push something through it. Caryn got up and slowly walked over to see what's lying before her above the window below it. Caryn got up and slowly walked over to see what's lying before her above the window to the floor below it. There was a machete. The blade was short, but new, and sharp to the edge. The handle fitted her well with the tight grip. She looked at the window once more, the woods across the apartment complex. There's a tall, ominous figure, lurked between the trees surrounding him. Caryn couldn't make out his face from far away, if he even had one. Loud ringing pierced through her ears. An unbearable headache swelled up in her mind. She looked away and the pain ceased. The ringing slowly faded. Machete, still in her grip, the inner desire she kept inside her for so long had quickly been brought up. The burning hatred boiling within her veins tensed as it made her grip tighter to the newly equipped weapon. Her expression went from confusion to oddly calm and content. It's like calling out to her, letting her finish what she couldn't do before. Her eyes looked at the blade and then looked back to the window before turning around and leaving her room. Her father slowly tried to get up from his drunken slumber, but instantly met his end when his head got cleaned off from the neck from his daughter of his. The machete sliced through like a warm butter from the dish. She had never felt anything better. The flesh sliced through cleanly, without leaving any rough edges as blood gushed out from the severed neck like a broken water fountain. She slashed off the limbs away from the torso as they split apart, chopped up every single piece from the butchered corpse. Dark blood splattered from the walls and the floors like unveiling an art piece. When she finished up her act of content violence, she cleaned up the gory mess she caused and threw away his decapitated head to the local lake. Earlier, she dragged his oversized body into parts of a garden trash bag to the place where it was being buried. The head submerged the lake, the body buried 6 feet deep as she carried a shovel along with her. Her father used to work with landscaping before he got fired and became an alcoholic. After she did what she had to do, she sat by the lake, being relaxed and at peace. For the first time in years, while having her head down she smiled, until she felt an eerie but calm presence standing behind her. A tall, dark shadow loomed over her as a pale white bony hand laid comfortably on her left shoulder, but she didn't mind the unexpected visit. She's just glad the torture is finally over. She looked up, her face now covered by a purple mask with enormous dark eyes and a jagged black smile. Both the mysterious figure and Caryn suddenly vanished, without a trace. I don't recall if I've ever done one of these stories before, but I think this might be like the newest one. I have not read one of these in a long time. This is a proxy story. I believe that's what it's called. Now, if you're not aware what a proxy story is, it was a very common genre kind of in the so-called golden age of creepypastas, where Slender Man, who wasn't even a creepypasta initially, but that's besides the point, would take on some kind of heir or figure. And these people, well, some of them are quite famous. You saw a mention of a character. There's like a mention of Tiki Toby, who is arguably the most famous one, of someone Slender Man kind of has under his wing or control. It's left very ambiguous, obviously, since he can't speak. But there are other ones and other continuities. Like, I forget what it was called. It was like the ARG stuff, like the Everyman Hybrid stuff. Marble Hornets. Hoodie and Masky. Those two were also, like, hugely influential proxy characters. They probably kickstarted the whole trend. But I think your enjoyment of the story is going to rest with two things. It depends on your feeling of proxy stories, and it depends on how you feel about the characterization of Caryn, because it's kind of crucial to the entire story. The first one is easy. If you don't like proxy stories, you're probably not going to enjoy the story. I'm somewhere in the middle, where I've seen one or two okay proxy stories. A lot of them don't tend to be very good. A lot of them tend to be very self-inserty. It kind of just like someone wrote it after one day in high school when they were upset at their math teacher, and then like they killed their dad and their families. And a lot of those kind of tropes are here, but it's done with a little bit more tact because there's a lot more focus on Caryn as a character. Because, as she mentioned before, she grew up with ASD, Autism Spectrum Disorder, which kind of warped the way she was able to communicate with some people. She didn't have many friends in school, which does make sense. It's a totally reasonable backstory of why this person would be like that, and kind of the destruction of the relationship with her father since her mother left. Though I do feel the need to offer some criticism that we hardly ever see them talk. I feel like when Caryn should have come home, she should have had like an argument, like a really awkward argument with her dad, because it would have shown how he just could not understand her condition and could not connect with her, or wasn't willing to connect with her, versus the kind of just the drunken mumble and then that happens. I feel like it would have been a lot more sympathetic if she wanted to connect with her dad despite everything, but he wasn't having it and she couldn't figure out how, because it would tie in to how she was raised with the spectrum disorder. I think that is my biggest criticism with the story, is just her overall lack of real speaking with people. She had that extended conversation with the bar guy, Marty, and I can buy that she would speak very comfortably because this is someone she trusts quite a bit, so she's a lot more comfortable, can be herself. We don't really get to see much out of her experience with students, but doesn't matter that much because that's a backstory element. I will say I guess I kind of question they just kind of didn't like her because she was smart. I mean, it's mentioned she, has the disorder, but I think it might have been the smarter play to play into more. She just doesn't interact with people that well, and it kind of causes people to assume she doesn't like them, and they don't like her back, and kind of start that cycle of like bad intentions, which definitely would have helped make her a lot more sympathetic if she tried to be optimistic and make friends. But just that huge communication barrier completely wrecks it, and then everyone kind of involved ends up miserable. I think it'd be a lot more sympathetic for that. Though what we do have is not bad. There is a lot more consideration for character development here than most proxy or like creepypasta characters, original characters. The one thing I do like is that they were a little bit more restrained with the proxy stuff. I find that a lot of the proxy like induction is ridiculously bombastic. Like, if I remember correctly, like Tiki Toby in the original story burnt his house down, which seems a bit extreme. But Caryn just killing her dad in some like hole in the wall apartment and then leaving the body, it feels a lot more reasonable to do, even if like the Slender Man was in her dreams first. Though I do kind of wish she would try and relate to him as someone who can't communicate, because he doesn't have a mouth, he can't speak to her, so it has to be all like non-verbal and gestures, which I think you could have had like a running theme of the struggling to communicate, of just where your intentions are clear, but something is, the wires are getting crossed, so you can't fully speak. Maybe that was a bit intentional, like the bones, the foundations were there, and I'm kind of just looking too into it and trying to like sculpt it in my own thing. I have to admit, I'm kind of crossing the border of offering criticism at the same time, but kind of overstepping a bit, where I'm sort of sculpting into its own thing. You know, the author, we've spoken on live stream before. It's been around for a while, this story for her, and obviously it's her story, not mine. So ultimately, it's her choice what she wants to do with it. But this character does have a lot more stories going on. This was just her origin story. There's a lot more short fiction works on the Tumblr. I'll leave in the link below. I don't think I've ever read a creepypasta on Tumblr before. I've read them mostly on like the Some Ordinary Gamer wiki. It's like a external site sometimes, maybe one Google Doc, but I don't know. I think maybe it's kind of neat to read one from Tumblr. Also, I can't apologize enough for being very, very late. I just got very busy. I was like in between videos, but now I've done one and I'm very fastly progressing through this other one, so I actually have time to record creepypastas and not feel overwhelmed, so I actually expect more soon. I'd rather not leave with another month-long delay, but every time I say that I feel like I do it again, so you'll just have to wait and see when it happens. And as always, tell me in the description below, did you like it, did you not dislike it? Regardless, I'll see you like a next video, and until then, have a lovely rest of your day.